The transition was supposed to be a triumphant victory lap, but instead it became a baptism of fire. When Toprak Razgatlıoğlu officially made the leap from absolute domination in World Superbikes to the prestigious Grand Prix grid with Prima Pramac Yamaha, the motorsport world held its breath. Carrying the weight of 3 world titles and the legacy of being the first Turkish rider to realistically threaten the elite class, the pressure on his shoulders was immense. He wasn't just racing for points. He was carrying the pride of a nation and honoring the memory of his late father, the legendary stunt rider Arif Razgatlioglu, who taught him how to manipulate a motorcycle at its absolute limit. Toprak's entire racing identity was forged on chaos and defiance. In a paddock dominated by ultra-smooth, calculated precision, the Turkish rider brought a wild, high-risk philosophy. His signature style became a global phenomenon, entering corners with the rear wheel hovering inches off the tarmac, locking the front brakes with violent pressure, and forcing the machine into submission through sheer physical willpower. For years, this defiance of physics brought him unmatched glory. But Grand Prix prototypes are a completely different breed of machinery. They are rigid, incredibly sensitive instruments designed to be guided, not bullied. From his very first outings on the Grand Prix bike, a jarring reality began to surface. The staggeringly high corner speeds and sophisticated electronics of a premier-class prototype do not tolerate structural anarchy. While his raw pace over a single flying lap could turn heads, maintaining that hyper-aggressive momentum across an exhausting 24-lap race distance was proving to be a nightmare. Paddock insiders quickly noted that the very instincts that made him a legend were starting to act as his greatest limitation. But behind that calm expression, pressure was building fast. To understand the depth of the crisis, one must look at the mechanical revolution happening deep inside the Iwata factory. For over 2 decades, Yamaha was the final stubborn holdout of the inline-4 engine configuration. It was a philosophy built on sweet handling, fluid chassis feedback, and unmatched mid-corner trajectory. However, as European manufacturers unleashed high-horsepower monsters that obliterated the straights, Yamaha faced a severe deficit. In a staggering structural pivot orchestrated by brilliant engineering minds, the Japanese factory officially retired the inline-4, deploying an all-new, high-stakes V4-powered monster for the current campaign. The engineering shift changed the game entirely. The newly developed V4 power unit delivered explosive acceleration and highly efficient aerodynamic packaging, finally giving the riders the top-speed weapon they had begged for. But this massive power injection came at a staggering cost. The brutal torque and altered weight distribution completely dismantled Yamaha's historic handling DNA. The chassis was no longer a forgiving instrument. It required a total rewriting of geometry and mapping. For Toprak, this mechanical transformation became an invisible wall. The V4 required an incredibly stable entry phase to maximize its aerodynamic load, meaning his instinct to lift the rear wheel and slide into corners was actively fighting the bike's fundamental engineering architecture. The telemetry didn't lie, and the internal tension between his raw, unyielding riding style and the rigid demands of the modern prototype was reaching a boiling point. Inside the garage, whispers began spreading. The early rounds of the calendar exposed a severe technical rift. On fresh tires, Toprak looked like a phenomenon, using his extraordinary front-end feel to mask the bike's underlying instability. But the moment the race crossed the halfway mark and tire life dipped by a critical margin, his machine transformed into an unmanageable animal. As the rear rubber degraded, the bike would lose all composure during fast direction changes, forcing him into an exhausting damage control mode that saw him drop down the order. Meanwhile, across the manufacturer divide, the data monitors told a completely different story. Fabio Quartararo, the established factory anchor, was navigating the exact same technical evolution with an uncanny level of control. Telemetry overlays revealed that while Toprak was forcing massive load spikes into the front tire, Quartararo's machine remained remarkably balanced, gliding through flowing sections with minimal chassis disruption. The contrast was stark, and it was causing immense strain within the satellite Pramac garage. Technical analysts spent nights staring at the screens, watching how the French rider managed to preserve his tire life by avoiding extreme braking spikes. Toprak was facing heavy media scrutiny, with critics questioning whether a superbike champion could truly adapt his natural instincts to the clinical world of Grand Prix racing. The initial excitement was rapidly being replaced by a heavy cloud of anxiety. Some mechanics claimed something felt off, suggesting that the communication between the rider's seat and the engineering station was starting to fracture under the weight of expectations. Yet this was only the beginning of a far bigger storm. The grid was witnessing a silent, psychological clash of philosophies. Fabio Quartararo was the absolute king of rolling speed, prioritizing a balanced chassis that allowed the bike to flow through long corners like a pendulum. Toprak was the master of chaos, relying on severe stop-and-go aggression to overtake and defend. It was an ideological rift that went far beyond basic bike setup. It was a battle for the soul of the machine's development direction. As the technical crew dissected the data, it became painfully clear that Yamaha's engine braking algorithms and chassis stiffness were being tailored toward Quartararo's fluid methodology. Every upgrade that arrived from Japan seemed to reward smoothness, leaving Toprak's high-stress braking style increasingly stranded in a technical no-man's land. The Turkish star was trapped in a fierce internal dilemma: compromise his racing identity or risk sinking into obscurity. For a competitor who had spent his entire life trusting his natural reflexes, admitting that his style was causing the rear grip collapse was an incredibly bitter pill to swallow. Reports suggested that intense debates were happening behind closed doors, as the team searched for a breakthrough that would allow Toprak to retain his late braking weapon without destroying his tires. The pressure was mounting with every passing weekend, and the paddock was watching closely to see who would blink first. And from that moment, nothing would ever be the same. The championship arrived at the Circuit de Barcelona Catalunya, a track that represents the absolute ultimate test of tire management and chassis balance. The Montmeló circuit is notorious among teams for its searing track temperatures, highly abrasive asphalt, and a layout completely dominated by long, sweeping corners. Sector 3 and the notorious final turn require a rider to hold a lean angle for what feels like eternity, demanding immaculate rear traction and continuous momentum. For Toprak's traditional approach, Catalunya was a tactical minefield. If he attempted to rely on his trademark front-wheel line locks and violent decelerations here, the low-grip track surface would chew through his rear tire within the opening 5 laps. Paddock insiders knew that a conventional approach would lead to a catastrophic performance drop-off during Sunday's long race distance. The team was staring down the barrel of a definitive weekend that could dictate the trajectory of their entire year. The Pramac garage was an environment of intense focus as Friday morning approached. The technical staff knew they couldn't afford to chase a setup that only worked for a single lap. Rumors surged that the team management had laid out a radical, high-risk plan to completely break the deadlock, a strategy so unexpected that it would catch their rivals completely off guard. Yet the real turning point happened away from the cameras. Before the opening free practice session commenced, Toprak made an announcement that sent a shockwave through the pit lane. He openly admitted that he had been studying Quartararo's telemetry for weeks and was ready to completely abandon his own setup philosophy for the weekend. He ordered his technical crew to mirror the French rider's unique geometry, weight distribution, and soft engine braking configurations, stepping into completely uncharted territory. This was a massive gamble. Quartararo's setup was the product of years of integration with the prototype's character, a layout designed for a rider who never forces the front end. For Toprak to adopt this approach meant overriding every natural instinct he possessed. Mechanics scrambled to alter the linkage ratios, lower the center of gravity, and adjust the electronic deceleration maps to create a bike that prioritized mid-corner rolling speed over raw stopping power. The paddock watched in fascination as the number 7 machine rolled out of the pit lane with a radically different stance. The extreme nose-down geometry that Toprak usually favored was gone, replaced by a flatter, far more stable profile. It was an incredible moment of humility from a triple world champion, a willingness to dismantle his own racing identity in the pursuit of ultimate speed. But what the paddock discovered next shocked everyone. As the opening practice sessions unfolded, the timing screens began to paint an astonishing picture. The V4M1, which had looked so erratic and aggressive in previous rounds, suddenly appeared uncharacteristically calm and poised through Barcelona's sweeping bends. The telemetry confirmed that by adopting the smoother load transitions of the factory setup, Toprak was no longer spiking the tire temperatures, allowing him to maintain an incredibly consistent pace across a long run. More importantly, he hadn't completely lost his identity. While the bike was tracking beautifully through the long, flowing arcs of the second and third sectors, Toprak was still managing to inject a controlled version of his late-braking brilliance at the end of the main straight. He was blending Quartararo's fluid momentum with his own world-class front-end control, creating a fascinating hybrid style that the V4 prototype seemed to absolutely thrive on. The technical team could barely contain their excitement as they analyzed the data traces. The experiment was proving that Toprak was not just a one-dimensional maverick. He was evolving into a highly flexible, deeply analytical athlete capable of reprogramming his entire riding philosophy on the fly. If this newfound balance could be maintained when the pressure reached its peak during the race, the entire hierarchy of the championship was about to face an explosive shakeup. However, the twist that followed would change the championship narrative entirely.